And there's a lot of good and bad in our history. And I hope we take what was bad and make it better. Sometimes our history books don't tell us the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I want the truth to be a part of what this is about.
Welcome, everybody, to the Warrior Podcast. My name is Frank Lardino. I'm your host. We are on location today in Trout Lake. We're at the Trout Lake Museum, and we are here with my special guest, Sandra Carruthers. She is the curator for the museum. She is a historian. She has studied history, and nobody knows the history better than her of Trout Lake. And with no further ado, welcome. Well, I'm welcoming myself, Sandra, to your museum.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure. So let's tell me a little bit about how long you've been living in the area and a little bit about your own personal history.
We moved up here in 1987. My husband, who is a veteran, worked for the Air National Guard, and he was civil service, and he worked on fighter jets. Well, he had his first heart attack at the age of 37.
Oh, boy.
Which means he had heart damage, which means he could not continue his job with the civil service because he had to be in the Air National Guard and he had to be military ready. And with a heart condition, he couldn't be. Mm. So that was when we decided we used to come up here in 78 on up to snowmobile, and we loved it up here. And we decided to sell everything we had and no longer try to keep up with the Joneses and buy a little place. And so we did. And we moved up here in 1987. We built a couple of cabins and rented them to snowmobilers and raised our kids were already raised. We helped raise the grandchildren. So.
Oh, nice. So I have grandkids too, and it's a whole different. Grandkids are almost better in a lot of ways because you're in a stage of your life where you're not go, and, grabbing for more. And then you can kind of actually enjoy them a little bit more.
So now I have 8 great-grandchildren.
Get out of here.
7 of them boys. So,
wow. So, and how many kids do you have?
I only have my daughter and my son. And my daughter has one daughter, Caitlin, but she has no children. So my son's children are all of our grandkids.
Okay, so your son has...
he has 3.
3, and then from those 3 come all the great-grandkids.
Actually, from 2 of the 3.
Oh, wow. How about that?
The one granddaughter has 5 boys.
Awesome. And then where are your children located?
They're all up here now.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
My daughter just moved up here during COVID, and she is a hospice home health care nurse in the area, has been a hospice nurse for many, many years, and I'm so proud of her.
Yeah, that's I don't have the internal fortitude to do that. That's a hard job. So very important job too.
She's very good at it. Just the compassion she shows to the patients and their families is amazing. And then my son, he works for the prison system.
Oh,
and he's the head maintenance guy for the Newberry prisons.
Awesome. So. Well, you did good, my friend. I'm a parent and a grandparent, and when you get your kids to adulthood, that's the best you can do. The rest is on their own. So,
that's right.
You made it, and you have some grandkids and great-grandkids, which is awesome. So, tell me about the evolution of the museum. So we are originally a church, is that correct?
Yes, this church was built in 1911, 1912, and the land was donated by the local doctor, Dr. Charles Logan. And it was first a non-denominational church for many, many years. Then it became a Methodist church. And then most recently it was a Lutheran church. But in 2012, they closed their doors because they just didn't have the support, or they couldn't keep up with everything. They had itinerant ministers, and they didn't, have the membership to keep the church doors open. And the church was given to the township. And my cohort, who's Loretta Loomis, and she's the president of our historical society, she said to the township supervisor, "We should turn it into a museum." And as soon as I heard that they wanted to do a museum, the history in me came right out.
Yeah, awesome.
And I said, I'll help.
Awesome. And you gave me a tour, and I love history too. I'm just fascinated with history. So this is a pleasure for me. So that you started a museum, and then you went on a collection of artifacts tour. Like, how did you do that?
Well, it was interesting. We just opened the doors, and the community started bringing all of this stuff to us. And of course, then we started doing internet research. Internet's such a great thing for finding stuff, because you'd hear about something and then all of a sudden, oh, I can look that up, and found stories about some of the little communities that were here. And there's a very rich history for a very small town.
Can you tell me a little bit about just the basic history and lineage of the town itself?
Well, in the 1880s, railroads came in because of the lumbering, and all the lumber camps and so forth. And then they found limestone, and then we had quarries. Well, they needed trains to transport all this stuff. And that was pretty much the only mode of transportation, because there was no Mackinac Bridge. And getting up here, they brought a train, and they had a train ferry that would bring the train across.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we have some pictures of the trains being loaded onto the ferries to come across the straits. Then people found out, oh, there's hunting and fishing up there. And the next thing you know, you have that coming in. And so the railroads built the town. Trout Lake became a railroad depot and a hotel. That's how it started in 1895.
And for people who are geographically challenged like me, we are in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is God country, right?
Yes.
It's God's country.
Yes, it is. It's
so beautiful up here. I'm happy to be here. I have friends who live here now, who you know, Josh and Ricky, who introduced us. All right, so the town grew via railroads and stuff, and then
you brought the farmers in, because you had to supply all these crews with food. And next thing you know, you've got stores being opened. Dr. Logan himself opened a 5 and 10, a local general store. And then his only daughter, married, and they ran the store. And then every little burg had a depot and a post office.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of those are ghost towns now. And the stories are just amazing. I love it when I find a new story.
Yeah, we're going to show some pictures throughout the podcast of the displays. You had mentioned the quarry. Tell me about the big quarry here.
Well, the Fireborn Quarry is probably the most famous. And we actually have a book that was written by a gentleman who's with and I always have to take time to say that, it's the Michigan Karst Topography Conservancy.
It's a lot of syllables.
Who now owns the property for Fireborn. Beneath Fireborn, first of all, is the largest cave system in Michigan.
Oh, wow.
Which I find just fascinating. And I have a couple of people that I know that have told me stories about spelunkers, going in and finding all these things. And there's waterfalls in there, and of course there's a lot of water. So you have to be expert to go through it. But I just find that fascinating. But the quarry systems were really prevalent up until the 30s. Of course, the Depression changed a lot of lives because a lot of places closed down by the 30s. But still, there's stone quarries that are making a living. And now next door into where Fireborn was is Wilwyn, and that's owned by the Greymont Company out of Canada, and they quarry stone.
Oh, is it limestone as well?
Mm-hmm.
Super interesting. So then we transitioned to, hey, this is a beautiful place to fish and hunt, yes?
Yes, it became a resort, and it still is pretty much a resort area. We have thousands of people that come through. We have a wonderful little campground that people come through. In fact, that campground's been there since Henry Ford's time.
Oh, wow.
Ernest Hemingway has been through this town.
Oh, wow.
Arthur Godfrey's been through this town and done not podcasts, but radio casts
Yes.
right from this town.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And yeah.
Trout Lake itself is very beautiful. I come from Chicago. I've lived in the big city my whole life. And the people here, they're completely different than the people there. Maybe it's a small town. Maybe it's a combination of that and having to be a survivor because the winters here are not like winters there. And the bugs, like these mosquito tornadoes that come out here, like the people are survivors and everybody, I think, kind of bonds together. Everybody has hunted and fished. Every person, all the males that I've met here they talk about hunting and gun calibers. You know, it's pretty cool.
Now, it's also one of the largest snowmobile areas. People come up here to snowmobile because the winters usually, not last winter, but usually the winters the snow is just amazing. And I can remember the first time I came up here and I got off my snowmobile and stepped off the path and ended up to my hip in snow. Like, okay, we don't have winters like this in Ohio. We have a blizzard once in a while, but we don't have winters like this in Ohio.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, let's circle back to the church now that we talked about when it was built and when it was Dr. Logan donated it. You had mentioned to me that there were very few records left from the church transitioning through different iterations.
We cannot find any church records, and I don't know whether they would have been turned over to the diocese or what. It's sad. And maybe somebody came along and threw them away. I find an awful lot of times, and being a historian, that, you know, just like I see an old building being torn down, when there's records, those records have meaning, and to throw them away without really perusing those records is sad. We have a lot of people come in here and, oh, I was baptized here, oh, I was confirmed here, or I got married here. And of course, we want those stories.
Right.
We want that information. But a lot of the original, although we have a lot of original families that are still here, a lot of the matrons and patrons who would have know the stories, they're gone.
Well, when we put the podcast up, I'll put some information, like a plea for people if you have stories, history, written history, to contact you, and hopefully we'll get some more stuff for the museum.
And I always tell people, because I've begun quite the expert at digitizing pictures. I can take a picture of your pictures. You don't have to leave your pictures with me. But I take a picture of your pictures, and then I can put them up. And it's better that we don't have original pictures up, because original pictures disintegrate.
Right.
And if you digitize it, I can put those pictures up. Most of the pictures here are digitized of the original picture.
That's awesome. Yeah, so we'll do our best to do that. I noticed you have a piano in the church. Is that the original piano?
Yes, it is an original piano, and the lady who gave that to us gave it back to the church. It was in her home for a long time because they had a little keyboard piano last year. She offered it back to us, and we are so pleased. Marge Founderworth, and she's in her 90s. And even though she didn't grow up here, she's lived here a long time and has a lot of stories. I am always amazed when somebody says, oh, but I don't know much. And I said, how old are you? Because if you are over 50 years ago is important.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And then what do they call the little baptismal
platform? Font.
Yeah. And you have that one too.
We have the original font, and we have the last altar, which is
right behind you, yeah.
And we kind of converted it.
Yeah. That's very cool.
But for the most part, we gave area churches. I sent out about 40 letters to area churches. Any artifacts that we have from church that you can use, collection plates. We had a lot of altar cloths. We had all this stuff. We still have brass candlesticks left. We still have this like a chalice light that hung over the altar that's still here. And I will gladly give them. We gave a lot of crosses. We gave a lot of hymnals away. because we can't display them all, and we had to make room. We got rid of a lot of the pews. The pews were huge, and they were not original to the church because we had to have room.
Right. And just for our people watching the podcast, if I had to estimate the dimension of this interior space, is it like 20 by 60 or?
Yes, the church is about 23 feet wide. Our lot is only 25 feet wide.
Oh, wow.
And I think it's 50 the other way.
So 20-ish by 50, and this was the church for the entire town, right?
Well, there was a Catholic church, but for the most part, it was this church and the Catholic church. And there are churches in all the little communities that were around the area.
Now, was this building ever used for something other than a church, like a school or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Very interesting. So we talked about the railroad, and you had showed me, and we'll put pictures in, that the spikes to secure the tracks, they all have little dates on them.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So we'll show the one from 1930, the little 30 on there. Do you see it? That's super cool too.
Yes, and when I talked to some railroad workers this summer, and I asked, do they still do that? And he says, I think so. And I said, well, we've got this whole pegboard that somebody got at a yard sale that has all these spikes in it. And I think the earliest one might be 1915. So,
wow, that's something.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about the area businesses that are here, some of them that have come and gone that are relevant. You talked about the doctor had a five and dime, and
yes, and that's now the Rock House. And there's a gentleman there that deals in antiques and rocks. And
that's the little store right there. It's just like what,
and
1 minute walk.
The back of it used to be the doctor's office.
Wow.
And the doctor's house is still here. The Buckhorn, which is one of the oldest, and that's that picture up there that's got the Quonset style roof.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the oldest restaurants in the town. And it was actually moved from Main Street, which now the Main Street is Front Street, by a team of horses. They moved, and a lot of the houses in this area were moved by teams of horses.
Wow.
And at one time, when Trout Lake started to grow as a town, Ozark, which is now a ghost town, had more people, but they moved houses to Trout Lake.
Awesome.
So that was pretty typical of the UP, that when something closed down and houses weren't being used, they'd either move sometimes across the ice, and because we have a lot of lakes, and sometimes they moved them with teams of horses.
So again, I'm geographically challenged. Trout Lake is kind of geographically close to several Great Lakes, correct?
Yes. Lake Superior's to our north, of course. Lake Michigan's to our immediate south. We're located between St. Ignace and Newberry, kind of in a western diagonal. And then Lake Huron is right there at the bridge, at the Mackinac Bridge. It's a unique place to live because that bridge is what connects you to the rest of the world.
Right. It's a beautiful bridge, too.
Yes.
I don't know when they completed that bridge.
1950s.
Really?
Yes.
It looks almost brand new to me. Beautiful piece of engineering. I've been to Mackinac Island. You have to obviously take a ferry there, and from my memory, they don't have any cars on that island, correct?
No. The only car, they do have a police car. They used to have an ambulance, and I think they have a fire truck. But I understand they don't have an ambulance anymore, that if there's an emergency, they get them on a boat or in a plane in the wintertime. And the squad from the St. Ignace area meets them there and then transports them to work.
I can't remember from my GPS, but we're about 40 minutes from Mackinac City, or no?
About 30.
30, okay. Yeah, just to give people a...
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of the landmarks around here. You had mentioned when we walked the Wilwyn Lodge. Tell me about that one.
The Wilwyn Lodge was originally a lumber baron's retreat. And the last owner, Bob Considine, was quite prominent in turning it into resort retreat for VA wounded soldiers, whether that was post-traumatic syndrome and they had therapists. They'd have people there that would help them. They built a beautiful little, I think it was 5 rooms that was handicapped accessible. If you were in a wheelchair, they had horses there. It was just a nice little resort. And I learned about it on a podcast, or not a podcast, but on a broadcast from our local news from Traverse City. And my husband and I decided we had to go see it. So we went, and we were just fascinated. But then along came Graymont, who wanted to purchase the property, which had been given to the American Legion. And they traded property with a place downstate, and they moved that resort downstate. But I'm hoping they haven't destroyed the lodge. The lodge is just beautiful.
That's awesome. We talked about some of the prominent people already, but there's I'm going to move my head here. There's a picture behind me of a lady.
Yes.
And tell me about her.
Well, we're pretty sure that this lady is Katie Knopp. Her portrait was found in the attic of would have been her grandson's family. And they brought it in, and they said, well, we understand that this might be the lady that got killed by a train when she was trying to put the mail bag on the train and her skirts got caught. And this is in 1918.
Wow.
We have 3 genealogists that are members of actually 4 of us are genealogists that are members of the Historical Society. Well, Jeanette Lozen was instrumental in looking this lady up and finding her death certificate, and she was killed by a train.
Wow.
And she was married to the Bowden family. There's a lot of history of Bowdens in this area. We're excited. We like the idea that we're pretty sure it's her, but no one knows for sure.
But it's part of the mystique of history. Sometimes you're not 100% sure, but but the story is real.
The story is real. The story is real, and it was Katie.
And you have the death certificate there, yes? So
yes.
That's super interesting.
And I'd just like to put a plug to everybody. Label your pictures. And I know I'm as guilty as anybody else. How many pictures do you have? I have my grandmother's pictures. I have my mother's pictures. I have my aunt's pictures. And a lot of them aren't labeled.
And thank you for bringing that up. That, to me, is extremely important, is preservation of history. I have done that with most of my photos. I write down who's on there because, in my opinion, for the most part, we're forgotten in 2 generations, right? So you have great-grandkids, so you have children, that's 1 generation. So you started early, so you'll be remembered for 3 generations, but your great-grandchildren's children, they will likely never know you. Mm-hmm. So if you don't label those pictures, they won't know who you are.
And we have lots of people that bring old pictures in, and they are not sure who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just really important to me.
I agree.
It's so sad to go into an antique store and see all these old pictures, and nobody knows who they are.
So what I do is I journal a lot, and I've been journaling since I was in high school. Sometimes I'll come across a picture in a photo album that really sparks some memories. So I will tape the photograph in my journal, and I will write who's in the photo and the memory associated with that photo. So I'm really creating a history book for my life and the people. And then when somebody passes away, and you go to the wake and you get the little card that has their picture and a little bit about them, I will tape that in my journal and I'll write about that person. And if I'm going to this wake on behalf of a friend that this person was related to and I didn't know that person, then I'll ask my friend, tell me a little bit about your father so I can memorialize that person in my journal. And this just happened to me 2 weeks ago. my wife's oldest cousin, and my wife passed this year, and you and I talked about that. I didn't know him that well. I saw him at a couple family functions. So I went and I grabbed the card, and then in the back break room, I saw his mother and his two sisters. So I walked back there, and my wife's aunt is 96. And I said, I took George's card. I didn't know him, but I'm going to tape this in my journal and write about him. Can you tell me a little bit about him so I can memorialize him in my journal? And they went into the whole history of him, and sure enough, that's what I put in my journal. So you and I are lovers of history. We want to preserve it as best as possible.
And one of the things we've started here is we have memorial. You can donate money, and we will write up a memorial, and pictures back here behind me are people who want to be remembered.
Oh, that's really cool.
And I have one I'm in the process of doing, and he was a World War II veteran. Quite the story, was wounded and survived and went on to live to 70 years of age. So, but I think he had like 11 wounds.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was. And I've got he's handwritten in this wonderful Blue Star Mothers album that was put together of his military history, of what he went through.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you want to talk about this book here? Or?
Well, we were very fortunate in getting this book. It was found, of course, in an attic or in a basement. I'm not sure which, but it's disintegrating. And by the way, one of the ways that I try to memorialize all of this stuff is digitize it. And so these are all handwritten types of things. I'm not sure if you can see it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Handwritten in script. They don't teach script anymore.
Right.
And lots of pictures of all these places that were resorts, hospitals, and then tons of pictures of veterans, their commendations.
Wow, that's kind of like somebody would put a scrapbook together, right?
They put this scrapbook together. And we have two ladies who served, and they have this one. This was the ribbons on the funeral for one of the people.
Wow.
She was a chaplain. These were her gloves she would wear when she was a chaplain. It's just, if you run across one of these things, don't throw it away because it's falling apart.
Yeah, that's golden stuff.
They even have all the baby gift thank yous.
Wow.
What the Blue Star mothers would give to mothers whose husbands were gone. Or we have just story after story. And we didn't get to talk about Phil de Graaf, which I should talk about Wegwas and Phil de Graaf. He was a commander, a lieutenant commander, and he served, but he ran a naturalist resort over here called Wegwas. And so we're quite famous for Wegwas.
What is naturalist resort?
He brought naturalists in and preserved the flora and fauna of the area.
Oh, wow.
And identify all that. And he'd have camps for kids, and he had dinners there, and he had a Native American crew that would come in and work the dinners. But he's the one that Arthur Godfrey would fly in and do a broadcast from his lodge.
Very cool.
So, yeah.
Could you show that? Hold that one up too.
Yeah.
Very cool.
But it's just amazing. I'm so thrilled that they brought this in because I've been looking for pictures, and you'll see the pictures of our wall, and I've got names and no pictures. So that's going to be remedied as soon as I get to it.
Yeah. Did you digitize this one yet or no?
I have gone through and taken pictures of every page. And in fact, before you came, I was working on page 1, and it's all digitized, and I'm going to put it in a digitized form because I can't let people go through this.
Right,
it's just like I said, it's just falling apart. And the letters and the stories are all written here. And I'm glad that the lady who was cleaning out her aunt's place found it and brought it to us.
Awesome. And again, we'll make a plea to everybody who watches the podcast to any historical stuff in this area,
Yes.
please contact Sandra.
Or if you know that your grandmother or came from this area, and you might have old wedding pictures, or you might have old pictures of where she lived. And yeah, we like that stuff.
So, so does the township own this now? This property? Do we have to pay property taxes here or anything like that?
Well, the township does not, no. And the township still has ownership of the building. The museum is put together by the Trout Lake Historical Society.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still in the process of figuring out all of that information, how it works. I'm a little concerned because we don't really have a signed contract or lease for this building. And you never know when a new board is elected that they'll say, why are we doing that?
Hopefully that won't happen.
I hope it doesn't. They've been so supportive.
This is just a sidebar. I went to a luncheon at, I don't even know what the building is, but it's like a big hall, and they have some historical stuff in there too about Trout Lake. What building is that?
That's the Trout Lake Township Hall.
Okay, and then they have lunch there every week, every
3
day?
days a week.
Okay.
And it's for seniors, but anybody can come.
Mm-hmm.
The seniors, you only have to pay a donation of $3, and anybody else who comes, it's $6. And if you really don't have any money and you want some good food, you can just come. I go because there's so much information that I get from a lot of the seniors. Even though I'm one of those seniors, but there's a lot of seniors there that tell us stories and say, oh, and they come to the museum, and they're very, very appreciative.
Yeah, that's awesome. So this just popped into my head. A snowstorm back in Chicago, we've had a few big snowstorms, but here, typically, you can have one snowstorm that is 20 inches or even more.
50.
One storm?
5 feet in Sault Ste. Marie one year. 5 feet.
Wow.
Of snow. Lots of building collapses. You don't go anywhere.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's what I said at the beginning, that one act of nature requires survivability skills. You cannot let 5 feet of snow pile up on your roof, right? You got to go up there and you got to clean it off and stuff. And everybody has survival is the best word that I can say. Yes. If we lose our power and whatever, we have a grid outage, the people here will survive. They're very resourceful that way.
We even have a warming station set up at the Township Hall, which has a generator. If everything's shut down, and it's not unusual still to be a week without electricity. And you have to stop and think about that. And how do you survive that?
Well, where I come from, 1 hour without electricity is panic time. So
so we've only had to use the warming station a few times, but that's a good thing. But it's there if we need it. And people just, we jump on the snowmobiles. And my husband used to do snowmobile rescues in Ohio because no one had snowmobiles, but we had them because we came to the UP.
Yes. Do you know what the current population is here? I know it swells when, tourist season and stuff, but...
Well, our population, if you did the whole Trout Lake community area, maybe be 500 people. And a lot of those go south in the wintertime. And a lot of our, we've got several really good organizations that try to keep things going. And, but we lose a lot of our membership in the wintertime. But it is hard to meet in the wintertime sometimes because of just the travel. And it's an older population. So they don't want to be out at dark. They don't want to be out in the snow.
Right. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. The kids have to travel how far to go to high school and elementary school?
25 miles.
25 miles.
That's pretty typical up here.
Yeah. And then we talked a little bit about the Trout Lake Elementary School. So give me a little history about that.
Well, we have the Trout Lake Elementary School building is still in existence, and we have a young couple who have just purchased it, and they're hoping to turn it into kind of a community center, or that things can happen there. They're they've got a lot of work to do because, it's a school building. But it was very small. And for a while, it operated up until the 1960s. I used to know the date off the top of my head. But it had only 4 classrooms and a gymnasium and a cafeteria. At one time, there would be as many as 3 classes within a classroom. And so the teacher...
You mean like 3 different grades or?
Kindergarten, 1st to 2nd.
All in one
kindergarten
classroom.
through 3rd. Or almost like a one-room schoolhouse. And I love the stories when people come in, oh, Violet Shipley, she was our teacher. And I found out recently because we work closely with the Rudyard Historical Society. They have a book out, and one of my good friends taught at the very end of them being open, and he taught kindergarten through, I think, kindergarten 1st and 2nd or something like that. But then as the kids got older, they would be shipped to Rudyard. Rudyard and Trout Lake have always had this connection because even the original school, which was built in 1909 or so, was only 1st through 10. We didn't have kindergarten back then. And the 10th graders, if they wanted to get a diploma, they would take the train to Rudyard, or take the train to St. Nicholas, or take the train to Newberry.
So you had to take the train to go to school every day.
Yes. They used to have 6 daily runs in this town, and 8 tracks, I believe, is what I've been told. And every little community had a depot. So I can't imagine how many times you'd have to stop as you were going.
Yeah. That's kind of like city train transportation.
Yes.
You stop at every major street. I used to transport to work like that. So I did meet the couple who bought the elementary school, and they're
nice couple. Brenda.
Nice, and they're physically strong and motivated to get going. They have that go get 'em look in their eyes. So I think they're going to do something good with that place.
Yeah, Brenda and Rich are just dedicated to making that part of the community again.
And what a vision too. So we talked to them a little bit about it. That's pretty cool. We didn't really talk about the veteran display here, and I wanted to save that for last because you and I are very passionate about that. Your husband was a veteran, and we'll talk about that too. So we have a display for veterans, which I will post the photos right here. And we've had some prominent veterans come out of here.
Yes. And a lot of commendations, a lot of Purple Hearts.
I saw names going back to World War I, which is pretty cool.
Yes.
And I said this to you, and I'll have to verify. I was in a museum in Michigan many years ago, maybe 15, and they had a display of Congressional Medal of Honor winners, and the museum curator there said Michigan has turned out more Congressional Medal of Honor winners than any other state. And I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. We're going to really shift gears here. So we talked about the museum and a little bit about the town, and then, wanted to have more personal conversation with you about you. You told me a little bit about your family, but your husband passed in 2018.
Yes.
And that was pretty hard. Yes.
Yes.
I lost my wife in this year, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But you perhaps could help me a little bit with the experience of carrying the grief and sadness. But so tell me a little bit about your husband and the journey he took.
Well, my husband and I grew up together. We didn't really pay attention to each other until he was in high school and I was my first year in college. He was a year behind me. We got married. He was 19, I was 20.
Wow, cradle robber.
And I grew up in this little town called Lithopolis, Ohio, and it's got quite the history. If you ever want to check it out, it's amazing. I was related to half of Lithopolis. He was related to the other half. So when we got married, everybody knew who we were.
That's awesome.
That's not quite as true anymore because Lithopolis is being engulfed by Columbus, Ohio. So,
gotcha.
It's becoming more of a sleeper community for Columbus now. We started out, in the middle of the Vietnam War, I graduated in 65, he graduated in 66. And of course, a lot of our friends and a lot of our relatives were being drafted. That was when they had the draft lottery, which is, again, it's a history that a lot of people don't understand and don't know about. And his mother did everything she could to get him into the Air National Guard so he would not have to go overseas. Well, it didn't work because he was in the Air National Guard. He worked as a civil servant for the Air National Guard. He was a fighter jet mechanic. And he got activated during the Pueblo incident, another incident in history that a lot of people don't remember. And his unit was activated, and off he went to North Korea, or South Korea. He went to Kunsan, South Korea, and left his pregnant wife with a little toddler. Well, not quite toddler. She was only 7 months old. And I was pregnant for our second child. And what people don't realize that they think, oh, military, they get really good pay. I got $110 a month. He got $27 a month. And when my son was born, I got another whole $15 a month.
Wow.
I couldn't live on that. I couldn't keep our apartment and ended up moving in with my parents. Thank goodness I had supportive parents. And I was at the time trying to finish my education. I was 2 years out in college, and I was trying to raise these two kids, and I worked a couple of jobs. I actually started substitute teaching because you could teach. There was such a shortage of teachers, you could teach. And he went off to Korea. And the other thing that a lot of people don't realize today, there was no communication except letters. And the letters are the thing that you have that connects you with your spouse. There were no phone calls. I think he called me once. We had a very poor connection in the year that he was gone. We didn't know how long he was going to be gone. He did a lot of stuff while he was in Korea. Being an aircraft mechanic, there's not as much threat of being on a front line because you're behind the lines, basically. But he helped one of the orphanages there, and he and his buddies would go and throw parties for the orphans and take food to the orphans and just spend time because they were missing their families. And of course, we're missing them as we are sitting back without our spouse. Mm-hmm. And I can remember my little girl, as she was growing up, as she was 7 months old when he left. He was gone for a year, so she was 18, 19 months old when he came back. Well, she hooked up to my dad right away, and any man she saw was a daddy. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of cute, but it was it tugs at your heartstrings. And I don't tell this story very often, but we weren't sure when he was going to come home, but it looked like May or June. Well, on May 4th, my dad and sister drowned in a boating accident.
Oh, my God.
He was 42. She was 10 years old.
Your dad and your sister?
Yes.
Wow.
So,
and you've got two little kids now, and your husband is overseas.
And my mother, and I have a brother that's 16, and the brother 12 was with them, and he survived. And we can go through the whole survivor's guilt thing. That's another story.
I can't even imagine.
When we notified, of course, you had to go through the Red Cross to do any kind of notification to your spouse at that time.
And then just pause you on the story. Was your mother still alive when that happened?
Oh, yeah. 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 She had two boys yet to raise. There were 5 of us kids. My brother and I were both married, the oldest of us. She still had 2 boys left to raise, and that was her little girl, you know. So anyways, yeah, we became a very close family.
Well, you either become very close or you break apart. Like
yes.
Something like that is insane.
One of the things about military wives, we contacted my husband. He went to his commander and he wanted to come home. And they said, well, that's not your blood relative. So we were in the process of having and granted, I was emotionally wrought.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard. I was 22 years old, had 2 kids, and lost my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And we were going to go through our doctor and have the doctors declare that I was so mentally unstable because of this incident that I needed my husband. Well, my husband, in the meantime, went into his commanding officer and he says, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going out on the next plane, whether you give me permission or not.
Mm.
So he was brought home. My dad's brother was on the battlefields of Vietnam. Danny, my Uncle Danny, is only 2 years older than me.
What year did this bad thing happen?
This was in 1967.
Okay.
Right in the middle of the worst of Vietnam, I'm sorry, it was 69. We were married in 1967. Uncle Danny was on the battlefield. They came to the battlefield. Of course, immediately he was allowed to come home. It was his blood relative.
Right, understood, yeah.
And they pulled him off the battlefield, put him on a plane in his fatigues, in what he was in, flew him to San Francisco, gave him a uniform, and then he was able to come home to the funeral. My dad was fire chief of the community. He was a Mason. He was a big part of the community. We had hundreds of people that came to our little town to see him. And because it took so long to get everybody home, we had 3 days of visitation, which is kind of torturous.
Yeah, yes.
My Uncle Danny had a really hard, tough time because his dad had died when he was 12.
Meaning your husband's dad, too.
Yeah. He kind of latched on to his oldest brother.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I don't understand why Johnny went and I didn't. I was the one that was in danger.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those things that you don't realize has such an impact.
Mm-hmm.
I remember getting a letter when they were going to send Don home and to the wives to say, well, if he hears a siren and he ducks, God takes cover. This is what.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, just kind of giving us some warnings of what it might be like for, even though he was not in combat, but living in a military situation.
You don't have to answer this, but when you had the wake and services, your sister and your father were side by side. How did they do that?
They had two coffins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I never liked the custom. I don't like wakes.
Like it. I don't like it, and I do not think you have closure.
I don't either.
And I can remember being numb through most of it. Mm-hmm. Now, I was honored that all these people wanted to come through.
I'll bet you there was a lot of people.
Oh, yes. And I remember a gentleman that we knew that he says, I've been to a lot of funerals for Supreme Court justices and so forth. He says, I've never seen a longer funeral procession
And
to the cemetery.
And it does have meaning.
Yeah.
It does have meaning. That gives me motivation to go to wakes. Nobody likes to go to wakes, but when your presence there does mean something to the family.
Yes.
So, wow, that's crazy.
I like to be able to get together with the people and the family and the relatives and to give them comfort. But to stand in front of the car, oh, they look so good.
No. So I'll just share my personal story. My wife died this year, and it was a sudden thing. So she didn't feel right. Doctor, then 11 days later, she's dead. And my wife and I would have this argument about wakes.
Oh, yeah.
And, I told her, I don't want to wake. I want to be cremated. I don't care what you do with my ashes. And then I want you to throw a big party with all the good food, good wine, play the music I like. I like 70s music. And I want it to be a celebration. And we'd have this argument, and she would use the word closure. She would always say, closure, closure, closure. And I'm like, I don't want it. Yeah. You can do whatever you want, but I'm telling you, I don't want that. I want to be cremated. I want the party. So now, this year, she's in the hospital, 3 days, 4 days in the hospital, and she's coming to grips with her diagnosis is not good. And I'm sitting on the couch with my son in the hospital room, and she goes, I don't want to wake. I want to be cremated and throw a big party. And that's what we did. And I'm so grateful because seeing her in a coffin, it doesn't give you closure. Like you said, it's the worst thing you can do. And I'm in agreement with you there.
And my husband was the same way. Cremate me. I don't care what you do with the ashes. I had family members that were very upset about that. In fact, my daughter-in-law, she says, "You won't have closure." I said, "Yes, because what we do for in memory of Don, or what we did, he loved that what I call hot damn, the whiskey, the cinnamon whiskey, and we would have shot. So we'd get together, we'd all have a shot of cinnamon whiskey, and I'd say, every time you get together, we'll gather together. And of course, we had family in Ohio, we had friends in Ohio, and a lot of them would have dropped everything to come north, but we didn't want to pull that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would get together at various groups, and we'd have our bottle.
Yeah.
And everybody would take in memory. And there was a snowmobile group that started coming to our cabins 35 years ago. And we called them our Ohio Gang. And most of the members of that Ohio Gang that are left are my son's age. Mm. And they come up every year, twice a year or more, to snowmobile. And they considered my husband their dad again.
Wow.
There's 4 brothers. They even came up and helped us build our garage. Every year they go to Soldiers Lake, which is one of the little lakes in the area, and they do a memorial to my husband, and they drink the cinnamon whiskey.
That's awesome.
In memory of my husband. And last year they made me go with them on the snowmobile.
Yeah. That is awesome. So you're a little bit further on down the road than me with carrying the grief, but
it's hard.
Holy cow, you've had 2 huge spikes in your life of grief. I never had a spike like with my wife, but I can't imagine, your father and your sister, and do you remember how you survived that first round? Like, how did you get through that? How did your mother get through it?
Well, it was very difficult for Mom, especially losing Mary Beth. And she always said, "I always thought your dad would go first," which I thought was interesting because she was 5 years older than my dad. But she said, "But I never thought I'd lose one of my kids." Mm-hmm. So that was very difficult. She wouldn't talk about Mary Beth. My brother, Jeff, who was with them, and swam to shore and started to go back in to help his dad get her out because they went over a little spillway dam on a river. Mm-hmm. And she got caught in the undertow of that dam. And we think she got hit by the boat when it went over. It was just a little rowboat. And Dad was trying to pull her up, and my brother supposedly saw him bring her to surface, but then lost her. Mm. And they found my dad quite a ways down the river, found her up against the bottom of the dam, and or the spillway. So it took a diver to get her out. Mm-hmm. But my brother went through all the survivor's guilt. We didn't have counseling. Her whole class showed up outside the doors of the church. And there were classmates that left letters on her tombstone for years. For years. A couple of them even named their kids. Her name was Mary Beth, and there were a couple of them that had either Beth or Mary in the names of their kids. Mm-hmm. And they were 10 years old at the time. My brother had a rough time dealing with Dad being gone and being there. And through life, he had his ups and downs with jobs, and we wanted him to go to college. He was a bright young man, and he tried it, and he couldn't focus on it. And he was 12 at the time when it happened, and he had the opportunity to become a fireman for the Columbus Fire Department. And it was like, what a turnaround. It felt like he could do something to save other lives.
That makes sense.
It's hard. That survivor's guilt's really difficult. All the things you go through. Mary Beth had spent the night with me the night before. She used to play with my kids all the time. And I would almost ask her to stay, but they had this fishing boat that they had done, and they wanted to they christened it, and they were taking it on its maiden voyage.
Wow.
All of them could swim, but it's.
So let me ask you this: up until that point, were you a family of faith?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time at the church.
And then did that faith get compromised after that event?
Well, of course it did. My brother married a very nice Catholic girl, and he had a real hard time dealing with why God would do this to his, especially his sister, his little sister. And so my mother, it saved her. Church saved her. She became pretty active in the church. She became active in a group called Eastern Star. She was very active in that group. And she did remarry at 14 years later. She was young when this happened.
And so were you. You were, you were in the early 20s, yes?
Yes, 22.
Yeah. So it's interesting to me about how we perceive God in heaven and stuff. And we could very well believe in God in heaven, in Jesus in heaven. And then when somebody goes to heaven, which is the mission, then we get angry, right? But we get angry for ourselves, This is something that's helped me with my grief is I know where she's at. She's where we're all going. She just got there before the rest of us. And that's helped me. You know what I mean? I don't get mad at God. I'm happy for her because she's with God now. It's so interesting. I can't imagine. So your brother to present, is he still alive?
Oh yeah, my 3 brothers are still alive. Yeah.
And is he doing good?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Unfortunately, my husband's family, 5 kids, 4 of them are gone.
Wow.
And his older brother, who's 5 months older than me, is battling cancer and liver issues and 78. Well, he just turned 78, so.
And you are?
77.
77. It's so interesting how fast life goes by. And I subscribe to Stoicism, which is ancient Greek philosophy. And the Stoics, they had 2 kind of fundamental thoughts that were the foundation of the philosophy. One is memento mori, which means remember you will die. And they use that notion not as a morbid thing, but hey, this could be my last day, and make sure I live my best life and not to sort of sweat the small stuff. And the other phrase is amor fati, meaning love of fate, or I love my fate. So I don't take time for granted. And I was like this way before my wife passed, because you can just pay attention and see. And when I tell people about the shortness of life, I go, ask a 100-year-old person if it seemed like a long time, and they're going to tell you no. And yesterday, I went to a nursing home with Ricky, and I met 2 100-year-old women sitting at the same table. And I told them about how I tell people life is short, and I go, just ask a 100-year-old person. So I'm asking you guys, did it go by fast? And they're like, it went by really fast. I don't take life for granted. I used to say I've lived a good full life already because I'm anchored in gratitude. And if God came down and showed me a contract and said, I'll give you 10 more years and you'll die strong, you'll die on your feet, I would have signed the contract. And now I say I would take 5 years because I'm 60. If God guaranteed me 5 good years and I would die strong, I would take that right now because I've already lived a good life. I'm very grateful. So,
and I feel I've had a good life. And one of the things, I was a teacher for 38 years. And for most of those 38 years, I was a special education teacher. So, yeah, my goal has always been to make a difference. And I'm a firm believer in community service. I mean, why else would I be doing all this for free?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I just want to make a difference. And if I can make a difference in Trout Lake, which is where I live now, I mean, I grew up in Ohio. I'm a transplant.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But most of us who are working hard for this museum are transplants.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few people whose families have been here for generations. But we believe in preserving our past because it teaches us so much that can help us in the future.
Absolutely. And we must remember our past. This is our identity. It's so important, and it's very easy to forget in this world of the electronic age and internet, and we lose ourselves. We forget about the history. So it takes people to stay anchored in it. And I'm with you all the way.
Yes.
So,
and there's a lot of good and bad in our history.
yes, for
And,
sure.
and I hope we take what was bad and make it better.
Yes. Otherwise,
And-
we're not learning from the past.
And
right?
unfortunately, sometimes our history books don't tell us
Correct.
the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And so I want the truth to be a part of what this is about.
I love that. This is just a side story. I read about these two guys. They were roommates in college, and they were history majors. And they became best friends. So when they got out of college, they did their own things and stuff, but they started collecting history books. That was like their passion. And they would get history books, American history books, all the way back as far as they could find. And for instance, in 1870, you could read a depiction of the battles of Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg, five or 6 years after the actual battle.
Yes.
And they actually had veterans from both sides tell their accounts of what happened. So this would be in that chapter. And then they'd buy a history book that was 50 years past that one. And then everything about the Battle of Gettysburg had changed. And then you get to a point where the newest history books, there's nothing even about the battles of Gettysburg. So it's the evolution of the story continues to change with each iteration of the history book. And we honestly, in history, we don't even know what's real. How accurate are these history books that we've read? We don't even know. So it's interesting. I use the analogy of, because I have a chapter in my book called Facts. And the first thing I say is, every time I hear somebody say, well, here are the facts, I get the hair raises up on the back of my neck, because facts are not objective, they're subjective, right?
Yes.
So if you and I were standing on the corner here and we witnessed a car accident and the police asked me to tell my account of it and you to tell your account of it, they may not match up. And then they could ask us to retell our own story a week, a month, or a year afterwards, and we would change our own story, right?
Yes.
It's the fisherman's fish story, right? They keep growing. So you have to look at the history books and go, the same thing has to be happening there to a degree, right?
Well, and I had this conversation with someone, and of course, we just ended a political era. She was talking about a particular candidate, and she said, well, I heard this, and this. And I said, and where did you hear that? Well, it's all over the internet, so it has to be true. And I said,
Yep.
How do you know that it's true?
Amen.
How did you find out if it was true or not? And so, she just kind of gets this puzzled look on her face. It's kind of like the years ago when the yellow journalism and the print, if it was printed, it was fact. No.
Which has never been the case, right?
That's right.
Yep. The media, even back in I don't know a lot about Abraham Lincoln, but during his times, the newspapers, it's largely is propaganda, right?
Yes. Yes.
If somebody owns the newspaper and that person wants to push a narrative or agenda, and it's very hard for human beings to process all of that stuff and be objective, because there is a degree of bias in all information.
Oh, yes.
It's very interesting.
And your upbringing has a lot to do with that. How were you taught?
True.
In your home? How were you taught in your area? And you'll have a lot of prejudices before you even
Mm-hmm.
I think that first year in college really opens a lot of people's eyes if they've never been away from their home.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you lived through the civil rights era as a young lady, so you've seen a lot of stuff. You know, you were born. You're 77. You're pretty much old enough to be my mom. You would have been 17 as being my mother, but you still could have been. So
yes, I could have.
I was born during that era, but not really bore witness to it. So
And the whole feminism movement
and that started
and
when in
women's rights and how women were treated.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't that long ago.
No.
So,
and it's still, a lot of it's happening.
I agree.
There's still a big difference between wages
I agree.
for the same job. Or
I feel we're moving in the right direction in a lot of areas, but there's still
sometimes we take some big giant steps backwards, though, in
Yeah.
certain areas.
I agree with that too. My main bias, and to be critical thinking requires kind of two components. The first component is the critical thinker understands that all information has bias in it, and also that me, the thinker, is subject to a lot of bias. So if you can try to remove the bias up here, you'll open yourself to more data collection, which all has bias in it, and you at least be able to sift through a little bit more. You'll have a more informed decision or opinion because you're open to all sides of data. It's like vitamin C. You could read 100 articles on how vitamin C is the greatest antioxidant in the world, and then you'll find 100 articles on how vitamin C is toxic to the system and you should never take it or whatever. It's really hard to sift through where is the absolute truth. So, but to that end, your mission with history and trying to keep everything accurate, that's very cool.
Yeah. What a lot of people don't know is the time that we spend looking at the provenance of whatever article or artifact that's brought in. And I try to be real careful about making statements on our little cards about that are more accurate. And I get called out on it sometimes. But it's interesting that different people have different perspectives of what happened. I had one gentleman say, "Oh no, the buckhorn wasn't moved by a team of horses." So, but he wasn't here. But the family that owned that buckhorn through the years, that story's true.
Right.
So,
yeah, you have to use a uncommon sense, we'll call it now, to a degree. Yes. So then we'll circle back a little bit, and then we don't have to talk about it too much. But when your husband passed, you're now like more in my scenario, or I'm more like in your scenario. That's a whole different set of grief because the first spike we talked about, you had a lot going on. You had little kids, and you had a husband, and now this person that's been by your side the whole time. It's very surreal, isn't it?
You lose your best friend, the person you talk to all the time, the person you told everything to. I don't think anybody understands that loneliness till you go through it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand it for my mom. I can't imagine.
Right.
I can't imagine some of the things that she had to think about and go through. And here she is still raising two boys.
Mm-hmm.
I've been fortunate, and I've got my family close. They're there if I need them. But there's a lot of days that house is pretty quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you are going through that. And I remember we have several widows in the area. We should start a widows group.
But they're good to talk to because they have common ground.
But one of the gals who lost her husband probably 3 years before my husband passed, she said the second year was harder. Because the first year, there's so much to do to process that person's gone. You've got to change all this, the legalities and all that stuff. But the second year is when it really hits you. And I believe that, but I know last year, Christmas time, I was very nostalgic last year.
Yeah.
So you just go through those phases.
I call it the seasons.
Yeah.
And they are real seasons, right? You have to go through, but then it's the seasons of thought. And I have the holidays coming up. That's going to be hard for me and my crew.
Oh, yes.
But I like to say, I go, yeah, death's a part of life. I used to say it not even with heart into it. Death is a part of life, but it's the part of life that sucks. So it can be really hard.
Well, and it's sometimes with family gatherings, you kind of have a fifth wheel kind of feeling that you don't, here's all the husbands and wives and the kiddos and everybody's having a great time and you're there by yourself.
Mm. I look at that as a way to push back against the sadness and grief. It's like, even if I'm just putting on a facade, I need to do this for them because we now, our family trees are a little bit different, but I'm the rock now instead of her and I being the rock. So I have to pick up the slack for her not being here. So even if I'm feeling a little down or whatever, I don't want to show it and I don't want to talk about it either. Just so it's easier for them. You have to put on the strong face for your kids and your family.
Well, I'm kind of the matriarch of our family now.
Yeah.
When you're
sure.
the oldest, I was the oldest of the kids. And when we all get together, I'm a lot of times the oldest person there. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I always ask this question, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, how happy and fulfilled are you in your life?
Well, I do a lot. It keeps me fulfilled. Being a part of this museum is really important to me. And because I've really focused a lot on it, some of the other things that I've been a part of, I'm kind of pushing back. I can't do all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes a big part of my life. And I would not, probably, if my husband were still living, we would be other focuses. We would have planning to do a lot of traveling. And I now do a lot of traveling. I have, since he passed, went back to Hawaii after 40 years.
Wow.
I went, I've been to France. I've been to Spain. I did a Mediterranean cruise, and I'm getting ready to do a river cruise from Amsterdam to Budapest next year. We had planned to do a lot of traveling, and we did a lot of camping, and I kind of miss all that.
Yeah.
And I kind of miss having that companionship.
Oh, 100%.
A lot of times I've gone with family members to all these different trips or other people, and it's just not the same.
Mm-hmm. So the traveling is one that hits me hard too, because that's when we were at our best as a couple. That's when she could relax and not worry about everybody else. And it was like we were like almost a dating couple. So the traveling, have you done any of these big trips by yourself or no?
Well, I do a lot of, I travel to Ohio to see family, and that's a 9-10 hour trip sometimes. And I do it by myself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I miss having that companion. Yeah. And I keep thinking, I'm still able to do that. I'm still able to drive and do all that. But what happens when I can't do it? Mm. But no, I have not done it totally by myself.
Yeah. So,
other than I've stayed in hotels by myself or that type of thing, but that's more local.
Yeah. I think it's going to be
European trips.
It's going to be hard for me to go take a real trip by myself. I've done little things, but I'm always flying somewhere to meet somebody and hike with somebody, buddies and whatever. But for me to go tour Europe by myself, I don't even think I could.
I've thought about it.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate and I've been able to hook up with other people.
Yeah. I think one of the blessings about loss is it makes you understand it because you're in it, and it makes you better at helping others going through the loss, which I didn't even realize until my wife died, what it feels like. So I get it. And it's a struggle. It's definitely a struggle. So you didn't answer my question fully. I said on a scale of 1 to 10.
I'd stay 8.
Yeah, that's not bad.
No.
Well, we'll make it a 9 or a 10.
Yeah.
I said, what would make it a 9 or a 10?
Maybe finding somebody that you can do a lot of things with.
I got you.
I don't see myself getting married again, although, that happens.
Yeah.
And I was glad when my mother finally found somebody and got married again after 14 years of being on her own. But I don't see that happening. But I can see traveling with somebody, and it doesn't have to be male, female, whatever.
Yeah.
Yep.
I feel the same way. But I'm always a 10 because, like I said, if I'm going to sign a contract with God for 5 more years, I'm just happy to wake up in the morning.
I am. To be able to get out of bed.
Yeah, I'm punching in at a 10 every day.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, Sandra Carruthers, thank you for this time together. Thank you for sharing the personal stuff with me. Thank you for what you do at the museum. And
I really encourage people to come and see what we've done and share the stories. We're working hard to get all those stories on paper and doing family stories of all the families that have contributed to this wonderful little community. And I encourage you to come to the museum and check it out and make any suggestions or volunteer and spend some time here.
Awesome. Well, when the podcast is edited and done, then you can share the link all over, and we'll request from the community that we'll get some more stuff in here, and it will happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm really excited about putting this the Blue Star Mother's book together and getting those stories all down so people can read them and share them. And so that families that come in here and say, well, my granddad was a McMillan. And I say, oh, we've got a wonderful story.
Yeah. And, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, dear friend, for your time today. I'll be up here 3 times a year, and hopefully, we'll get to see each other again, and I'll stop by in the museum and learn some more about all the stuff in here.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hope you will.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining the Warrior Podcast. We're in Trout Lake, Michigan, with my friend Sandy Caruthers. We'll see you at our next podcast, and remember, there's a warrior inside us all.